The Way of Mastery, an Introduction and Brief History. The Way of Mastery is a pathway of enlightenment, a series of teachings which, like its predecessor, A Course in Miracles, claims to be the new teachings of Jesus Christ, given specifically for this time. The Way of Mastery begins with the story of how, in 1987, Jesus appeared to the channel John Mark Hammer, now known as JM. This communication and the earliest channelings are recounted in the first book of the Way of Mastery, known as the Jeshua Letters. A second book, The Way of the Servant, would soon follow. Starting in 1994, the teachings continued in a series of more formal exercises, originally given over a 3-year period, once a month, in audio format to a group of original students. These 3 years of formal instructions are known as the Way of the Heart, the Way of Transformation, and the Way of Knowing. During this time, private sessions were offered with Jeshua to many individuals, and many more teachings were given, generally on specific subjects, in public channelings as well. These are recorded and later transcribed, and are known collectively as the early years. Also during this time, in the early 1990s, of the creation of the early channelings and books, the Shanti Cristo Foundation was established by JM as a non-profit designed to disseminate the teachings and also be the caretakers of land in New Mexico that the channel JM had been led to purchase by Jeshua, quite miraculously. This unfoldment is known as the first and most palpable miracle of the pathway. The land, Temple Canyon Sanctuary, remains in the hands of the Shanti Cristo Foundation. The formal teachings of the Christ Mind Trilogy, as the Way of the Heart, the Way of the Transformation, and the Way of Knowing are known, concluded in 1996 with the Way of Knowing. In 2002, in a channeling, JM was asked to step away from the Shanti Cristo Foundation entirely. This has since been seen by the Shanti Cristo Foundation to mean JM giving up all connection with the Foundation and Way of Mastery teachings, while the channel himself believes this guidance was given so that he might, in a deepening process with Jeshua, bring forth additional and equally essential aspects of a larger pathway of teachings in the Way of Mastery. The Shanti Cristo went forward with publishing the Blue Book material, focusing on publishing the channeled texts while ending their association with the channel. JM began the 20-year or so development of the new materials, including the living practices and Aramaic teachings. He also led a series of sacred journeys, some with specific purposes given by Jeshua, and he has well taught an extensive series of workshops and retreats. The split in interpretation of how the material should be presented also has led the channel to republish all of the Way of Mastery materials, and recently has created an online temple for the exclusive teaching of the latter parts of the Way of Mastery pathway, including the living practices. The living practices include Love's Breath, Radical Inquiry, Shalu, and more. The Aramaic teachings, the Aramaic Lord's Prayer, and the Aramaic Beatitudes. Sacred journeys and retreats continue to be offered, and in time, the development of Temple Canyon Sanctuary and teacher training modules are expected to be integrated, as they are all essential parts of this greater pathway of teachings in the channel's vision. Shanti Cristo does not share this vision and continues to publish the channelings, and a new site, Audio Enlightenment, is also re-recording the original audio teachings on YouTube and publishing an updated version of the core texts. The core texts of the Way of Mastery are the Jeshua Letters, the Way of the Servant, the Way of the Heart, the way of the transformation, and the way of knowing. The history of the way of mastery, the evolution of it, the purpose of the sacred journeys, and of course, the teachings themselves, are considered to be the extension of Jeshua's atonement plan, multifaceted, profound, and world-changing. He has spoken to this through JM in various times and places, leaving us what he says are so many clues. The unfolding role and history of the way of mastery and its role in the world continues. The Way of Mastery Study Overview. As is often the case with major spiritual movements, a split in the interpretation of the Way of Mastery teachings has led to very different approaches to study of the material by different groups. The Shanti Cristo Foundation, originally given the task of disseminating the Way of Mastery teachings, currently recognizes only the channeled material direct from Jeshua through JM as being legitimate parts of the pathway, concluding with the Way of Knowing. It considers the Way of Mastery to be the three Way of teachings, the Way of the Heart, the Way of Transformation, and the Way of Knowing. It publishes them under one cover, under the title The Way of Mastery. Shanti Cristo also publishes the Early Years Channelings. It considers the Way of Mastery to be a self-study course. An overview of their offerings and curriculum can be seen at their website, shanticristo.com. Conversely, the channel JM believes he was asked to bring through material that was not directly channeled, but equally guided by Jeshua after the completion of the formal channeled material. They include the Living Practices, Aramaic Beatitudes, and others. This pathway is described by the channel as having 4 essential and equal parts, the material directly channeled from Jeshua being only one of these 4. The other teachings include the necessity of interaction with others, as well as the vital presence of teachers trained to assist students in the deeper levels of study. The channel's vision. The Way of Mastery is a large and interconnected pathway of teachings, all directed by Jeshua. Each are equally essential. The Way of Mastery pathway offers a profound and comprehensive theology and lived experience of love and awakening via channeled teachings from Jeshua, formal exercises, a series of living practices, and more, all devoted to a genuine and radical depth of living enlightenment. This goes beyond intellectual belief or the acceptance of certain concepts and ideas. It guides the student into their essential and eternal heart, into a radical, alchemically transfigured gnosis, a knowing by being that which is known. The purpose of the Way of Mastery is threefold: to create a pathway that can support any student from their first steps all the way to truly awakening into Christ mind, to restore the original teachings given by Jeshua, Jesus, given to his followers, and to birth a million Christs. The Way of Mastery pathway is comprised of these 4 equal and essential parts: the Jeshua channelings, including the early years, the 5 core texts, and the later years, the Way of Mastery living practices and Aramaic teachings, facilitated teachings and sacred journeys with pathway instructors, and the Temple Canyon Sanctuary Land Project. The Jeshua channelings. The Way of Mastery is grounded in the direct teachings and the words of Jeshua. These include the 5 core texts, the early years materials, and the later years channelings. The living practices and Aramaic teachings. Brought forth after the completion of the formal, directly channeled works, the living practices and Aramaic teachings are taught by the channel JM as much of the core of the Way of Mastery pathway. Love's Breath, a breathing practice given by Jeshua, and Radical Inquiry, a profound inquiry practice based on the first 3 Aramaic Beatitudes, are the pillars of the living practices. An online temple of instruction has recently been set up for interested students by JM. A third and equally essential part of the Channel JM's vision of the Way of Mastery is the training and establishment of pathway teachers. This stage is currently in its early phases, ongoing and in development. The first two of the phases of the Way of Mastery pathway having now been completed. And finally, the fourth part of the Way of Mastery, the Temple Canyon Sanctuary. One of the most remarkable and palpable miracles of the Way of Mastery pathway is the land at Temple Canyon near Abiquiu, New Mexico. Miraculously purchased at the very beginnings of the pathway's establishment, it is an equal part of all that is unfolding in Jeshua's threefold purpose for the pathway. We hope you've enjoyed a quick overview of the Way of Mastery pathway. In terms of studentship, Jeshua gives several guidelines as to how the pathway should be studied. We respect these words as they are from the same source as the brilliant material which is so transformative. He repeatedly suggests that each of the way of teachings, the way of the heart, the way of transformation, and the way of knowing, should not be studied without doing the exercises themselves, without actually following the exercises as he has guided them. That would mean in the way of the heart, for example, the student would have to complete all of the exercises prior to even reading any of the way of transformation. Likewise, the completion of the way of transformation would be required before going on to the way of knowing in any way, even reading it. Studentship will become confused if these guidelines are not followed. This is why it was originally guided that these books should be published under separate covers, not in one volume, because the reader will tend to read forward. For a more comprehensive view at the Way of Mastery, support and classes leading students into the deeper depths of the pathway, please visit jeshuaspeaks.com. Thank you.